Hey you, come, gather around the campfire, and welcome to the party. This is Party Chat, a JRPG podcast, where myself, Cameron Hawkins, and my party partner, Kevin Kenson, discuss everything in the world of JRPGs and Eastern titles. You know, it doesn't have to be Japan, it could be Korea, China, but Japanese centric. And this is our first episode. We're really excited to do this. But before we get any further, Kevin, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. I got a little anxious energy going into this. I'm excited. We've been talking about this for a little bit, so pretty freaking cool recording this right now.
Yeah, we've been working on this for about 2 to 3 months, getting all the kinks figured out, and it's harder than you'd think to start a podcast. Like, it's not just there's like that joke about like, oh, you just grab some mics and podcast equipment and you just start recording. And it's like, yeah, you could do that, but there's other aspects to what we wanted to do with this, where we were just like, we want this to feel premium. We want this to be like the destination podcast for people that love JRPGs and Japanese titles, Eastern titles, and things like that. So yeah, this is super exciting. And I also feel like we're both in this weird situation where on the media side, media hasn't been super great, but over the past like 5 years I've been in this industry, I've gained a lot of contacts and I've gained a lot of like connections. And then, you are a YouTuber, you focus on like the general gaming aspects of things. You focus on accessories, game accessories, controllers, like things like that. But you also have a lot of connections, and you love to talk about JRPGs. That's how we got acquainted, was through JRPGs.
Yep.
Yeah.
The pandemic is when we met. We were just trying to find ways to socialize and talk with other people, and broaden horizons a little bit. And I don't even remember the name of the app right now, but it was one of those, chat room style. Clubhouse. That's right. Clubhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we just happened to be in the same room, and it was like, oh, wait, someone else in this room likes JRPGs. We can talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like, that's kind of what's exciting about this for me too, is that like you said, like with YouTube and stuff, I always refer to what I do as being kind of like macro level, like, oh, I talk industry news, I look more at hardware, but I love to also talk about games. There's just also a lot of people that do that. And so it's always been a lot more noise to try and cut through. And this is really exciting to just dive in as being like, okay, like, let's actually talk about games.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I've wanted to start a podcast for a long time. And like, granted, I have the Unlocking Kingdom Hearts podcast, and that's like more of a limited series type thing. But I was just like, man, I really want to do something that's consistent and ongoing. But I just like don't know. I wanted it to be the right thing. Like, I wanted it to be something that made sense for me. That's something that I would enjoy, that wouldn't feel like a chore that I'm doing every week or anything like that. And I was just like, and I feel like over time, people have really come to me specifically for like Japanese role playing opinions, like thoughts and things like that. So, and I feel like that is a hole that's kind of missing in a lot of games media, that JRPGs have always kind of been like this niche, even though it is a growing genre, like has become a bit more mainstream. It's still just like in the grand scheme of things, just not covered to the same degree as other genres.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so
It's an audience that always feels like it's a little bit on the side. Like, it's kind of like it's a part of the greater gaming sphere and it interacts with that, but there's always those occasions where it's almost like you're speaking different languages when you're amongst like fellow JRPG fans, and then you go into the wider sphere of other genres, and it's like, okay, like, it doesn't get talked about quite the same way. Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. So we thought that this would be like a great opportunity for us to be able to do this, use our connections, and use it for something that is a personal, like, collaborative project with us. And yeah, this is super exciting, and glad that we're finally doing it. And Kevin, if you want to talk a little bit more in depth exactly about who you are, what you do, your experience in the industry, and things like that for people that don't know you.
Sure. So my name is Kevin Kenson. As Cam was touching on earlier, I'm a YouTuber. And again, most of my main content that has been successful is what I usually refer to as being like macro level, where, industry news, talking about trends, speculation for the future of what's going on in the industry, but also a look at things like hardware, accessory reviews, like really a large part of my channel that blew up circa, 2019 was Switch content. Like Nintendo in general has always been a very core part of what I talk about and get excited about because Nintendo makes a lot of fun stuff. And right now I'm just I'm waiting for them to announce some more fun stuff. Maybe by the time this goes live, they'll say something.
Yeah, maybe by the time this goes live, the Switch 2 will be announced. And then for people that don't know me, my name is Cameron Hawkins. I'm a freelance writer, host. I've been doing media stuff for about 5 years now. I've had a little bit of experience in PR as well. And I've been featured on IGN, Kind of Funny, Game Informer, Rest in Peace. A bunch of notable websites and things like that. But and I love JRPGs. I'm in the process of writing a book on Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts is my goat, and that's me. I hate pitching myself. I hate receiving compliments. I hate pitching myself. But that's me. That's what I do. But I'm excited to do this podcast and talk about JRPGs with you, Kevin.
Which actually, on that note, before we move on, I know we got to get to a couple things, but maybe as part of introducing ourselves, what would you say are the major franchises, at least for you,
Sure.
when it comes to JRPGs?
Yeah, Kingdom Hearts, Trails, Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and then Persona, a lot of the Atlas games. I'm probably, at least in games media, I'm probably the number one Tokyo Mirage Sessions fan. I love that game so much. I popped off so hard when that game got ported for Switch because I played it on the Wii U, and I remember going into the GameStop, picking up my pre-order, and the person working had no idea what I was talking about. Hey, right. I'm here to pick up my Tokyo Mirage Sessions pre-order, and they're like, "What's that?"
It's amazing, is what it is.
It's really, really great.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I love most of. Oh, and then it's kind of recently been put into the JRPG box, but the Yakuza Like a Dragon series, I've played that entire series. I love most of the mainline JRPG franchises. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is one of my favorite JRPGs of recent memory. I will say the one that I'm not super crazy about, and I get why people like it. Don't come with your torches and your pitchforks, but I'm not super crazy on Nier. And I think that's more so because I don't think those games are fun to play, more so than the things that game tries to do in a narrative sense. I think the narrative elements of those games, which I think is what most people go to Nier for, is great. I don't think those games are fun to play.
And what's hilarious about that is that part of how Nier has blown up is because it went from really awkward and bad to play to being tolerable to play. Because going back and playing older parts of the series, going back to Drakengard or playing the original release of the first Nier that came in the US, those are rough to play. But the narrative is what really built its cult audience. And then Automata was just good enough gameplay wise where a lot more people were able to click with it and see the writing that's in that series for sure. So as for me, I will say that generally speaking, when it comes to JRPGs, I'm a little more rooted in what might be called the classics. I feel these days, well, there's a lot of new stuff that I get very excited about and keep up with, and there's current going franchises I absolutely love. I love Nier, I love Persona. The more recent Tales games have been really solid. Like Arise was fantastic. But like SNES, PS1 era stuff, like that's still where I lose my mind the most. Like I go back and replay a lot of the classics very often. There are games that have been officially ported eventually, or remastered, remade. We've been seeing a lot of that happen lately, and that's stuff that I get very excited about. Like a recent example that I totally lost my mind over was when we got Live Alive a couple years back. Like that was a game that I did not expect to ever officially get in the West, and that happened. Like someone decided that was a good idea, even though it did not do well the first time around. And I'm glad they did, because it is a truly a special gem of game to me. But yeah, so there's a lot of, I feel a little more rooted in the older stuff, but there's a lot of modern things that keep up with. Like Atlas in general, I think, is really killing it. Persona, Metaphor, fantastic stuff. I will say, since you said one you're lukewarm on, I'll add a lukewarm for me. And this is again a situation where I get it. I understand why people like it. It doesn't work for me to the same extent. I don't dislike it. I just don't. It doesn't hit me the same. I'm not big on Xenoblade. Like at all. Like I think they're solid. I think they're fine. There's nothing like wrong with them. But that's a series where whenever I see people like really good into how much they love it, I'm like, yeah, it's cool.
Here's what I'll say about Xenoblade. Because like, again, I love Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Like warts and all. That game has obvious issues, but like when it's good, it is like some of the best JRPG stuff that I've experienced in like recent years of recent releases. And I think the battle system in that game is still like really, really great. I played Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, which some people just hail as like the greatest game ever made, like that type of level of stuff. And I think like it's incredibly impressive that game came out on the Wii, right? Like this giant open map, like very technically impressive. But the gameplay of it was just like MMO style in a single player game, and I didn't really vibe with that a whole lot. I still want to say like overall I like the game. Like if you care about scores, I would give it like an 8 out of 10. Like I had a good time with it. And Xenoblade 2 was admittedly my first Xenoblade game, and I think that for a lot of people, for a lot of JRPG franchises, the first one you play is your favorite. And it's hard for that to change for a lot of people. It's like your first Final Fantasy normally is your favorite.
Yeah.
And then I played Xenoblade 3, and like I think it's really good. I don't think it's as good as 2 overall, but I think it's really, really great. But it didn't have. I think the thing that took away from me was I didn't. The gameplay, while it was cool for what it was, the blade system in Xenoblade 2 was so good. Like it was kind of like a slow burn type system. But then when you got all the orbs around a boss and then you destroy all the orbs, it's just so satisfying. But yeah, so I'm not gonna, I will always be happy when a new Xenoblade game comes out. Not like I would with like a Nier. I'd be like, okay, cool, a new Nier, like I'll check it out. But like, but with Xenoblade, like I like it. I understand why it doesn't work for you. I totally get that. But I do like Xenoblade.
We can have plenty of debates on some of this stuff in the future.
Yeah.
Like here's like an idea of our tastes,
Yeah, exactly. I think there's very little that we're just like, yo, this is just bad. You know what I mean?
I'd say
but we will also,
fairly open.
but we'll also be very open to be like, yo, this is bad or this is great. So we're very like straightforward people when it comes to our tastes in video games. We've had plenty of discussions privately where we're just like, oh no, that's garbage, dude.
Oh no, I can't wait for that moment to happen in the podcast. There's going to be a moment where
Yeah. No,
we'll get there.
We're gonna be devastated. But yeah, so before we move forward into kind of like the expectations for that y'all should have for from us for this podcast, we want to go through some special thanks on people that helped make this all happen. So the first person that we want to thank is Bryan Heemskerk. He is the art director over at Massive Damage, who done like Star Renegades, which is a really incredible game. Even if you're a JRPG fan, I think you'd like Star Renegades. Check that out. And Farah, the Sunder Tribes. He did the podcast art for this podcast. So if you're listening audio or like any of our profile pictures, you see like the campfire and all the items, you know, the iconic JRPG items. That was him. He's incredible. You can follow him on socials at Bryan Heemskerk. So nice and easy. Bryan, not Brian. Heemskerk, Heemskerk. Just to for the transparency. And then I want to shout out Alex Van Aken, who did like our video template that you're seeing if you're watching the video version, our thumbnail templates if you ever watch our video versions, as well as our Patreon banners. We'll get into Patreon in a second. He's the creator over at Viewpoint who does video game documentaries. You can support him over on Patreon as well. You can follow Alex at It's Van Aken on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram. And then you can follow Viewpoint at Viewport Video on YouTube, Blue Sky, and Instagram. Alex's handle is at It's Van Aken. And then while I want to thank Jericho, George. He's doing our podcast intro. It may or may not be ready at the time of this filming, but you'll know it if you hear it in the beginning. If not, it's still a work in progress. But he actually did. We licensed one of his songs that he did for his own self, for his own channel and stuff, for Unlocking Kingdom Hearts, which is the previous a podcast I've done in the past. And we asked him to create something new for this podcast. He's a freelance music composer. You can follow him at Jerichords on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok. So, with that all being said, we want to go into the expectations of what this podcast is, what you can expect from us, what our Patreon offers, things like that. So yeah, we're doing a Patreon where we have 3 different tiers of rewards for those that help support this project. We obviously, the money's going to help us just for our regular day-to-day lives, but we also have already talked about like how we want to use this money to invest in like recording equipment for interviews and things like that when we go to in-person events. Like we've both gone to SGF for the past 2 years now, where there's a lot of opportunities for that. I go to PAX like pretty regularly every year. I would like to go to Tokyo Game Show this year. I would like to make that happen. And there would be a lot of opportunity there with it being in Tokyo. And so that's basically like what our current first mindset is on where this money would go to. And so for the first tier is our $5 tier. We have an exclusive Discord where you can discuss JRPGs with other people that love JRPGs. You can just talk with me and Kevin. There's a bunch of different channels based off of different series that you can talk about, and all that jazz, as well as just casual conversations too. It doesn't have to be, Japanese gaming related. And then on top of that, we also give the $5 tier our weekly episodes once a day early. So weekly episodes will come out to patrons on Wednesday, and then it'll go out to the public on Thursday. We decided to launch this podcast on a Monday for reasons that I'll explain later.
Embargoes.
So yeah, if you're listening to this episode as it's launching, there's going to be another episode on Patreon in 2 days, and then 3 days to the public. So technically 2 episodes this week. And then our $15 tier is our second tier, and that will come with the previous benefits plus a monthly Q&A episode where you can basically ask Kevin and I any questions you want, gaming related or otherwise, appropriate questions. And then we have an episode where we're just specifically answering those questions from our community and our audience. And then the other benefit that comes with the $15 tier is Campfire Catalog. This is going to be our kind of like our book club podcast, special podcast that we want to do. We're committing to doing 4 episodes a year. It could be more, but the minimum is going to be 4. Because we wanted to go into this being realistic about how long it would take us to play a JRPG on top of like the modern releases, on top of our personal backlogs, things like that, that we could do in a timely manner. And so basically, we're going to try to, at minimum, we're going to release an episode once every 3 months. And then how that's going to work is the community will vote on 4 games, between 4 games, that me and Kevin propose. So we're each going to propose 2 games, and then the community will choose which game you want the next episode of Campfire Catalog to be on. Because we don't have a community just yet to decide that, for the first Campfire Catalog, we're starting with Chrono Trigger.
Hell
because, you know, a lot of people say it's the granddaddy of them all. Admittedly, I have not played Chrono Trigger yet. It's been a must need to get off my backlog for a while. And funny enough, with our podcast art and everything, we have all these iconic items and stuff. You could say the campfire symbolizes Chrono Trigger.
I mean, it's only one of the most iconic scenes in like gaming history. Not even just RPGs. Just like
yeah. Was it intentional? Absolutely not. It was not. It was not intentional.
It was. I saw that immediately and went like, oh, awesome, yeah, Chrono Trigger, front and center, perfect.
Yeah, no, it was not. It was just like this was the whole idea of like just being around a campfire and discussing JRPGs like a party would. You know what I mean? And I think that was kind of like the whole idea behind the podcast art and everything.
Yeah, which I will say too real quick, I'm excited that our first one is going to be Chrono Trigger because one, I think that is an interesting pick from the sense of like a lot of people do herald it as being like, you know, the JRPG, one of the most important ones like in the JRPG canon. It's a personal favorite of mine. You know, oftentimes I'm very bad at telling people favorites, but like when I have to be like, okay, sure, top 5, it's usually in there, usually number 1. And so I'm excited very much that you're coming from the background of like, you have not played this before, and I'm the person who's replayed it quite a few times. I'll give it one more fresh one for us doing this. But I'm very interested in seeing like what you think of it with fresh eyes, you know, not having any nostalgia for it. Versus, you know, I have a lot of nostalgia for it. Probably too much.
Yeah, I'm excited to play it. I'm excited to see what it's all about and see how I feel. So what's cool about Campfire Catalog is this is going to be the show more times than not that we're going to bring guests on. We're going to bring on people that we know that are very knowledgeable about whatever game we're playing, so that they can help bring more perspective, bring more education, bring more history to that game. We have a bunch of JRPG friends, so that's going to be really easy to find someone to be like, hey, who wants to talk about Chrono Trigger?
I already have 3 people off the top of my head that I'd be like, oh, that'd be great.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, first game's Chrono Trigger. I just whipped out my Super NT from Analog, and I got my Chrono Trigger SNES cartridge. I'm ready to turn that bad boy on and see what everything what it has to offer. I'm excited. And for those that aren't sure, that are listening to this now, that want to play Chrono Trigger for the podcast and everything like that, you can play it on SNES, PC, or the Nintendo DS. Those are your options. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of options. And in the future, we want to be better about choosing games that are accessible for people to play. But in this instance, it just felt right to start with Chrono Trigger here. So, yeah. And then for the last tier, on top of all the previous benefits, this is a limited tier. We're only limiting it to 5 people because of what we're rewarding. It just makes sense. where basically if you sub at the $25 tier consistently for 4 months, you can choose a topic of the show for the episode. So once we get done with the news, once we get done with what we've been playing, we're gonna have a topic of the show for every weekly episode, and you will get to choose that topic for us to talk about. We'll obviously like discuss like, hey, what do you want to talk about? And then once we are agree, like, hey, yeah, that's good. And it does not have to be like a question or a specific thing. You can be like, hey, tier list the Final Fantasy games, or like tier list, something like that. It doesn't have to be, it can be a lot more chaotic in that sense if that's what you want. So those are our 3 tiers. Again, you can subscribe on Patreon. And we also want to be clear of like kind of what you can expect with the content. So we have these weekly episodes every Wednesday on Patreon, Thursday for the public, but there may be separate episodes that come onto the podcast feed that will be like specifically a review conversation of a game that's coming out. That like, so when Monster Hunter Wilds, right? If Monster Hunter Wilds comes out and we're gracious enough to have received a code, like there will be an episode when the embargo goes up where we're just talking about Monster Hunter. But then like there will still always be a weekly episode on top of that. So there will always be that foundation of a weekly episode. Everything else will just be gravy, and all of that is just public to the feed when it goes up. The Patreon stuff is just for the weekly episode. Because just how embargoes work, that's just kind of how it has to be, and we hope you all understand that. Kevin, was there anything you want to say before we get into the news for the week?
I don't think so, other than I'm going to put that tier list idea in my back pocket just in case we do need to come up with something for later. No, like I think
Okay.
that covers, yeah, I mean, the main thing I really just wanted to dive a little more into was the Campfire catalog. I think Chrono Trigger is going to be a really interesting first one for us to dive into. Yeah.
Cool.
Feeling
Awesome.
good.
Yeah, so we're going to get into the news for the week. We have a couple of stories. It's, holiday break, so there's not a whole lot going on, but Falcom did reveal to us their current and upcoming project slate. And they got a whole bunch of stuff in the works, unsurprisingly, because Falcom releases games like candy, it feels like.
They're a workhorse. Like, they just have stuff coming out consistently. Like,
it's crazy. And their team is only 64 people. Like, we learned that they recently had a investors meeting or something like that. And like Kondo shared that it is a 64-man team. I'm like, that's crazy. For one, just the Trails games alone and the amount of writing and the amount, like how big those games are. Yeah. Crazy that they're able to do that. But then on top of that, they have like Ys and like other things coming down the line that it's super impressive. So I want to read down the list, or like the list of projects that they're working on. So they do mention Trails Through Daybreak, which at this point is out everywhere, right? It's, it's out in the East, it's out in the West. It's been out in the East for a while, but it's out in the West. The next one is Ys Memoire, The Oath in Felghana, which I have played, I have finished, and that is one of the games that I'll be talking about once we get to what we've been playing for the week. That comes out January 7th, so tomorrow. And then we have The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak 2. That comes out in the West February 14th, Valentine's Day. Then we got Trails in the Sky first chapter, which, oh boy, I'm so excited. That comes out fall 2025. In the West, or worldwide, actually. That's their first worldwide release, which is super exciting.
Isn't it also a big deal that they're doing simultaneous PC right away? I think I saw a few people making a big deal about that, like happening immediately.
I don't think it's the PC aspect of it, because like normally they'll get the game will come out in Japan, and then there'll be like a PC release for other Asian territories on Steam, and then eventually it'll come west.
Right.
So I don't think it has. From what I know, I do not believe it is anything about the PC that's being a big deal about that. But after Trails in the Sky, there is the Legend of Heroes Kai no Kiski, which we don't know the English name for that yet. But that came out in September in Japan, and it hopefully a lot of people in the Falcom community are expecting that it's going to come out this year, which is really exciting and really quick. Because when they announced that Daybreak 2 was coming out a year later, everyone was like really shocked because it was so quick. But it does feel like that Falcom is starting to kind of realize like, hey, we should try and get these out in a worldwide sense. They're basically doing what Atlas did over the past few years, where like, Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal, like those came out in the East first and then to the West. But now after that, they kind of just like, we're going to try and release all of this worldwide at the same time. And I think that's like super beneficial. And then outside of that, they have Tokyo Xanadu, a new Tokyo Xanadu project, which is exciting because I haven't played Tokyo Xanadu on the PS4 or Switch. They just did a updated Switch port last year. I will probably play that at some point this year. So I'm excited that we're getting something that's not Trails or Ys at the end of the day. That's what I'm excited about. It's like something different.
Right.
We got East 10 Proud Nordics, which
so
did you hear about this?
I did hear about this, and I did want to probe you a little about it because of the two of us, you're more the Falcom expert. I've played a couple of Ys games, but as we've talked many times, Trails is a thing I will be starting this year. Actually, is my plan. So I want to play the original before it gets remade. Like that's going to happen. But I did want your take on this because this is something that is not new to like the JRPG scene, but as far as I know, I think this is a first for Falcom where they released a game and however many, because we don't have a hard release date just yet, but we're getting a re-release on same platform with more content that is like the bigger, better version, right? Like this is something that Atlas gets flack for often because you'll have situations like Persona 5 to Persona 5 Royal, SMT5 to SMT5 Vengeance. They'll do the re-releases, and sometimes there's an extra benefit like, oh, it's on more platforms now, or, maybe it's a port to new system, but a lot of times it'll be on the same platform and just be, this is the better version that you can rebuy because, buy it twice. So Falcom traditionally hasn't done that, right? They've done remasters and remakes, but this is the first time they've done like a same platform, get it again.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just also going to say what makes this really funny is that because of the delay in when games get released, we just got Nordics, right? Like that was like December, November that it released in the West? October. Okay. So people bought Nordics in the West in October, and in late December, early January, we get news that, oh, by the way, it's getting re-released with more stuff in Japan. And here eventually, I would assume, maybe, we don't really know that for sure, but
it will, yeah.
Yeah. That's right there.
Yeah, I'm really upset about it. I don't like when Atlas does it. I'm really sad that they're deciding to do this. And like I played East 10 Nordics last year, and I thought it was good, right? Like I'm currently in the process of playing through the East series, and the way I'm playing it is through the chronology of Adel's life. And so 10, funny enough, is the first game after East 1 and 2. And so I played 10 and I enjoyed it. It's so far like it's high on my like ranking of the series, but like it's like a solid like 8 out of 10 game. Like it's not like something that I'm like, oh, I'm dying to play this again, or like, oh, that first time it was so good that like, oh, I'm getting a better packaged version of the same game. Like it doesn't give me that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're really trying to say like, oh, this is exponentially more than the original, and it's just like, why did you do this? Like, why? I know the answer is money. Like I know the answer is money, but like, why, dude? Like, like I am not. I do not see myself playing Proud Nordics. I just don't. Like, if we get a code,
I'll
it's all you,
that.
buddy.
Yeah, no,
it's all you,
that
buddy. Because I just don't want to put in the time, like 40 hours into something like that, and so I don't know.
Yeah, no, it'd be for fun conversations, because then I'll talk about my experiences with Proud Nordics, and I'll just be like, man, wasn't it crazy when like, this thing happened? You're like, what are you talking about right now? That wasn't in the game at all.
Yeah, maybe.
At least the version
but
we played.
just, like,
I don't know. We'll see.
But again, I like Nordics, but not enough where like Proud Nordics is like, oh, I gotta hop on that. Nope, not for me.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see if this is at all a trend that develops for them, because this is a first as far as I know. Again, they've done remasters, they've done ports. There's been situations where a game has been re-released in some fashion, but like same platform update is a little bit more of a bitter feeling.
Yeah, because like at least in Japan they had like ports of like the Trails games, Trails in the Sky games, and there was like Sky Evolution or something like that, and it was basically the same game, but like they just had like updated like portraits and things like that, like in like some like quality of life features, but it wasn't like, hey, here's a whole bunch of new content like in this style of like a royal, because like at least with like Persona 4 Golden, right, when that came out, that was exciting because we didn't get Persona 4 in like 10 years, it was a significant amount of time.
Yeah, well, and it was handheld, right? Like it's at least a whole different platform. Like you're going from PS2 to Vita, so like that's neat. Like that's a cool like upgrade. But like even Persona 3, right? Like this didn't. I forget if it happened in the West or not. Did we get FPS right away? I always forget. Because in Japan, it was original release, then FES, then portable. So it's like great.
It was like that. It was like that in the West too. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I always forget.
Yeah.
That.
So we'll see. Like unless they, with the promotional material, they like convince me like, oh, I need to play this game. Like I don't see myself doing it. And then this is where we get kind of into the unannounced titles of their slates. They have one unannounced title, no platform or anything like that. An unannounced PlayStation 5 ported title. An unannounced Switch title, which many people are suspecting to be Ys Memories of Celceta, because they announced at the shareholders meeting that is happening. So it's probably that. And then an unannounced Trails game and an unannounced Ys game. So that's what they got cooking over at Falcom. And then our second story is about Japanese developers. So basically, every year, 4Gamer does this big article where they get comments from a bunch of Japanese developers on like what their 2024 was and like what they're looking at for the next year, that type of thing. So I have some notable, not everyone, of course, but I have some notable devs making comments about their games that I think are worth mentioning.
Yeah. Can I actually, I'm going to interrupt your order real quick and dive into the one that I find most interesting for a few different reasons. So, Asano. For those of you that might know the term Team Asano, very heavily associated with the HD 2D style games, Octopath Traveler, Triangle Strategy. Before then, one of the big franchises for them was Bravely Default. They didn't do 2, but they did the original one and Bravely Second. Bravely Default 2 got outsourced to another team. And most recently, Dragon Quest III HD 2D. So what's interesting is, because his is pretty short, but it's also kind of a weighty statement, which is this year, 2025, we should be putting out the various things we've been preparing. Please look forward to what's coming. And the reason why that's kind of heavy to me, for a few reasons, is first off, various implies, more than one.
Various Day Life. No.
Of course, yes. I'm so excited Various Day Life sequel is happening.
Yes.
Oh, man. I swear if that is what ends up happening and you put that energy in the universe, we are canceling this podcast. But what's interesting about Various is because, as far as we know, openly talked about games, and this isn't even Team Asano specifically, this is really Square Enix in general. The only game we really know about is Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like Square Enix in general, their upcoming calendar, I'm sure there's stuff we don't know about. I'm sure there are talks. I'm sure there are things being planned. But as far as what is being, openly spoken about, we know of one game. So for Asano specifically to be like, oh, we have various things happening this year, and there's all kinds of things this could be. I know there was rumor and talk earlier this year, late last year, about how there was a Triangle Strategy 2 in development, but that got canceled. Maybe that was something heard incorrectly, and that is something in the works. There has been talk of whether or not they're going to be revisiting Bravely Default. And then also just one thing that I know a lot of people have been clamoring for, especially now that we have the kind of proof of concept with Dragon Quest III, is how many more classics can get remade in HD 2D. I'm personally the type where I'm like, I don't think every classic has to be remade in that fashion. I think there's other art styles we can explore, but it's undeniable that is a very popularly asked for thing right now. I mean, I've seen tons of demand for things like Chrono Trigger HD 2D, So
Yeah.
the fact that Asano's team has that kind of particular reputation of which specific games they work on and type of games they work on, and that there's supposedly multiple things this year, or at least multiple things being worked on. I'm very curious what that actually means. And then at the end of the day, what Square Enix is even going to look like. Like a year from now, what are we talking about for Square Enix a year in review? Because we don't know much right now.
Yeah, like not to go too far off topic, but when I was thinking about Square Enix a few months ago, being like, dang, like we don't really know what they got cooking next year. And they have had a pretty significant past 2 years, right? Releasing 2 major Final Fantasy entries.
Oh yeah.
And we know that they're working on some other like significant stuff that I just don't think is going to come out. Like we're going to get, it's not going to come out next year. Like we're not getting Kingdom Hearts 4 next year, or this year, technically 2025. Got to get used to that. We're not going to get Kingdom Hearts 4 this year. We're not going to get, I would not expect us to get Dragon Quest 12 this year.
Yeah.
But we do know that they're working on a Final Fantasy 9 remake, and we're also getting a Tactics remaster or remake. I'm not really sure which.
Yeah,
I'm leaning more towards remaster.
Yeah, like neither of those are official, but there's been so much evidence suggesting that they're in the works.
The Nvidia leak has never been wrong.
It has not been yet. I mean, the plans changed too. Well, because that's the other thing, interesting thing with Square Enix, right, is that they talked about, I forget if it was earlier in 24, if it was at the end of 23, but they talked about like changing their approach to development, right? We kind of had a string of lots and lots of smaller, you could call them AA, you could even call them sort of like, I don't know, AAA indie titles coming from them, where we just got a lot of releases back to back, and some of them were legitimately great, and some of them just kind of released and everyone moved on. And so there's been talk of them, changing their approach and maybe focusing on fewer larger titles instead of, a breadth of a wide variety. And so maybe this is also going to be the year where we kind of see that momentum change, right? We've gotten used to like 4 releases minimum. I mean, we have how many Square Enix games this past year? Tons.
Many. So many.
Yeah, so many.
I couldn't even like
Saga
make
alone got 2 games. Like Saga, the Saga got 2 titles. Like that's a lot happening. And so maybe this is the year where we're, by comparison, maybe we get like 3 things, 2 things. I don't know.
Yeah, it might be a slow year, but also I feel like it's not going to be because of Switch 2, man. Like I feel like Square has been such a good partner with Nintendo on things that like we're like, when we find out whatever Asano's working on, it's going to be in a direct. It's not going to be announced anywhere else. It's going to be announced in a direct, because literally everything that they've made, Octopath 1, Octopath 2, Triangle Strategy, Bravely Default 2, they were all announced in directs. So like a lot
of them were published by Nintendo initially. Like Triangle Strategy, they had to update it, because that's even been a funny thing with some other titles where they got delisted from the eShop for a little bit and then came back because they had to update the listing to no longer say Nintendo's the publisher, because it was for like, a 1 year or 2 year time period, and then it opened up, and then we saw them come to other platforms. That's why Octopath 1 was only on Switch for so long, and eventually made its way out. And Triangle Strategy, I mean, it's only made its way out to like the Quest right now, but maybe makes its way to PlayStation and Xbox now that that's been updated, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right. So the first, the next one because we jumped ahead a little bit.
Oh yeah, no, I
but
totally threw off your rhythm right away.
no, it's all good. The next one we have is from Yosuke Hayashi from Koei Tecmo. He was the director of Nioh and producer of Nioh 2 and most of the Dead or Alive series. He said, quote, in 2025, we'll be able to deliver the first title from Koei Tecmo Games' newly established development studio, AAA studio. Okay, I assume that he means that's a AAA development studio. We're currently hard at work on its development. So that's cool. Like, we'll get some sort of new IP potentially from Koei Tecmo. Koei Tecmo also, like, does the Atelier series. We're getting Atelier Yumiya in March. So that's cool. Yasuyuki Kaji from Psy Games, who was the game director on Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, says, quote, in 2024, we successfully released Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, a game we've poured a lot of time and effort into, including its downloadable content, and it was enjoyed by many players. A big thank you to everyone who played it. I'm currently working hard on a new game. While I'm not sure if we'll have anything to share by the end of 2025, the entire Psy Games team is working diligently to create exciting new content, so please look forward to it. I want to talk about this for a sec, because Grand Blue Fantasy Relink was a huge hit in 2024. I think people were surprised by how well it did. And I know that Grand Blue is a lot more popular in Asian territories. So maybe out there, it was just kind of like, yeah, of course this was going to pop off. But I think in the West, a lot of us were really surprised. And the thing that's interesting about it is just like that game was such a hit. And then they only supported it for like 3 months. And then they stopped. Where I feel like that they could have kept that game going for like at least a year, maybe even longer, because it was just doing so well. And it was like a semi live service game where you and so it's just like, why would you give up on this game after 3 months? Do you have any like thoughts on that, Kev?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, from my limited, Psy Games is not a team I've looked super in depth on, but from what I know of them, one of the things worth keeping in mind is that a lot of their titles, like all the Grand Blue stuff, is effectively spin-offs, right? Like the original major Grand Blue game was a gacha title that was huge overseas. It never really blew up here. I don't even know if we got an official localization for it in the West, actually, or if we did, it was way after the fact compared to when it was popular. But every Grand Blue game that it comes out is playing off of that gacha series. So, we have the multiple fighting games. We have Relink. There have been other titles announced that are all using that IP as well. And so I don't know how much they're supporting each of these games as being their own long-term ecosystem, as much as it is, here is another game that is going into the overall profile of another Grand Blue spinoff. You know what I mean? And that might be part of why it only got supported as long as it did, because the goal wasn't necessarily we're making our own Monster Hunter where we're going to have a expansion and it's 3 years of support or whatever. It might have just been cool. We made this one. People are able to get to end game. We're going to add a little more content. Move on to the next thing. And that raises the question of what is the next thing, right? Like, is it are we still messing with just the Grand Blue formula? Are we getting another spinoff from that? Are they beginning to explore a new IP eventually? I don't know.
I guess I'm just curious if like they kind of took notice of Relink and because people were like, the community was openly like saying like, yo, why are y'all abandoning this game?
Right.
So I'm maybe moving forward, like they learn from that, and then like when they do a Relink 2 or something in the same vein, they like, hey, we're planning on supporting this for a much more extended period of time. But
sure, maybe this was even a test run where they didn't have the long-term plan set in for that, and now that it's had the success it's had, it's like, all right, we need to build the longer framework version of this that we want to release and support for longer. Maybe this was kind of a test in a sense.
Yeah. We'll see. Next we got Kento Jimana from NIS. He's the scenario writer for Phantom Brave: The Lost Hero. Disclosure: I was paid by NIS in the past to talk to help to do a panel that in turn promoted Phantom Brave: The Lost Hero. my opinions and my statements on Phantom Brave: The Lost Hero in the future will not be like that will not go into play in any way. But disclaimer, moving forward. Okay. So Giovanna said, quote, "I'd be happy if you could look forward to Phantom Brave: The Lost Hero, a completely new entry in the series, coming more than 20 years after the release of the first game. I'm also hard at work on a new intellectual property that is as cute, touching, and overpowering as you'd expect from NIS. So I'll do my best to announce it as soon as possible. Please look forward to it." Yeah. So, the reason I put this in here is, one, NIS is working on a new IP, which is cool. For those that like Disgaea and Phantom Brave. And one of the things that was interesting when I actually spoke with Giovanna was about how they want Phantom Brave to kind of be this new pillar for NIS, like alongside Disgaea. So like, while we don't know what this new IP is, it seems like that moving forward, we're gonna get like more and more Phantom Brave games. This isn't just like a one-off sequel. They're trying to revitalize that IP and make it a consistent thing moving forward. And from what I've played of Phantom Brave so far, well, the first game I played, and honestly, it was relatively rough. There's like some weird systems that they had at play, and from what I've played from like demos at like PAX and things of The Lost Hero, it does feel like they have modernized it quite a bit. It's still Phantom Brave, but I did enjoy my time with it so far, and I'm like, it is a game that I want to check out when it comes out later this month. It does come out this month, and yeah, so that's something that's worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because especially if you've like followed NES for a while, I feel like new IPs were not a surprising thing back in like the PS2 games because there was a lot of just throwing different ideas out. They were all structurally very similar. Like they had a whole bunch of different tactics games, but they all were a little bit different. That's even when Phantom Brave originally released. Was you had that along with La Pucelle and the original Disgaea, and Disgaea is the one that really took off, and we ended up getting sequels, spin-offs. They made a pretty game on the PSP. That really became its own IP, while the other ones, at the time at least, were just one-off. And so it's interesting that Phantom Brave is coming back and is going to be a pillar, as you're saying, and then maybe they are going to start experimenting more with like, new IP doesn't necessarily mean entirely brand new gameplay style, but they're not going to just stick with Disgaea alone.
Yeah. You're totally right, because like, Disgaea's been a big franchise, like the franchise for them. Like I think every entry in the series except for 2 and 3 are on the Switch or on modern hardware. So like, I at this point I'm just like, port the other 2 so I can have them all on the same console. Like give them to me. So like, honestly, that's what I'm waiting for the most from them. But it's cool. I'm always like curious to see what they've got going on, because they don't do just tactical games too. Like I'm pretty sure they did like this. I don't know if it was a full on like visual novel, but it was kind of like a adventure game called Process of Elimination that came out. So they do other like things that aren't just like tactical or like traditional JRPGs. So I'm always excited or interested in seeing what they're doing. The next one we got is it's kind of funny. It's kind of like a twofer. It's from Kataru Uchikoshi from Tukio Games, who's like the writer and director of like AI, the Somnium Files. Yeah, Zero Escape. Yeah. Have you played the AI Somnium Files?
Oh, yeah, no, I love Uchikoshi is one of my favorite writers. Yeah, like Somnium Files and Zero Escape.
I love AI. I love the AI series.
No, like his writing style is such a fun, like it oftentimes gets a little away from him, but it just reaches into the right amount of weird, esoteric, like 100%. History and cryptic stuff, and combining it, and it goes places always. I mean, I Zero Escape, like one of my favorite games of all time is Virtue's Last Reward. Like the second Zero Escape game is so damn good, and
I haven't played Zero Escape or like the Non-Airy
None
Games
are games,
collection or anything like that, but like I need to get to that
you
eventually.
absolutely should.
Yeah,
They're excellent, and yeah, if you enjoyed AI, you'll definitely enjoy those.
cool. Yeah, so he says, quote, other Tukio related games, in addition to the 100-line Last Defense Academy, will be released one after another in 2025. Please be sure to check them out. To proceed to Kazutaka Kodaka, from Tukio Games, creator of Danganronpa, writer of Danganronpa, Master Archives, Drain Code. They're doing this project together, which I remember like when we watched the direct where it was announced, I was losing my mind. I'm like, yo, literally like two kings working together is crazy. But he said, quote, 100-line Last Defense Academy will be released on April 24th, 2025. We've created it using all our company's assets and loans, as it's Tukio Games' first original intellectual property. If it doesn't sell, we're prepared to go bankrupt and retire. But we've put everything into making something worthwhile. So please look forward to it. That's really convincing to me. If you're saying like, yo, this thing we've put all our money into, we're literally going to go bankrupt if this doesn't sell well. To me, that says confidence. Like this game is a banger.
It's also a story I feel like we've been hearing a little too. I mean, look, as we know, the industry is actively on fire. Not in a good way.
That's true.
Burning down. But like that was even the story, right? With one of my favorite devs, Vanillaware. They were talking about with Unicorn Overlord. They're like, oh yeah, no, we basically like went bankrupt while making this, and it's finally here, and like we're recouping. But yeah, like they were in like dire straits financially while making that game, and they've been working on it a long time. Like it's been in development since before other titles that have released since.
Speaking of which, play 13 Sentinels. That game is so good. If you're
Dragon's Crown,
play 13 Sentinels.
Like Vanillaware in general.
Vanillaware in general, but like 13 Sentinels is like
good shit.
It was so good.
But yeah, like I just worry how many devs that's the story of. Like, I hope this does well, because especially when coming from, like you said, two kings, right? Like we have established big name people for those that pay attention to who's involved in staff, and it's like, great, even they're not like safe, right? It all depends. It all banks on how this next one does. At least, how they're saying it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to this. Like, just like these are two people that by name alone, I'm like, I'm going to play your game.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And so, that being said, I haven't played Raincode yet, but I want to. But still, like it's just like that. I know that's a game I need to play. That's the point I'm trying to make. So I'm excited for this game. I'm looking forward to checking it out when it comes out. Suda 51.
Speaking of creators that you just you're there for.
100%. If you don't know who Suda 51 is, No More Heroes, Killer 7, Shadows of the Damned, Lollipop Chainsaw, he said simply, quote, I'll announce a new title, or maybe. For sure.
Which that's par for course, I think. That's just Suda's one of those people where, especially in interviews, I feel like it's always vibes based, and it's just like, we're gonna get news when we get news. I don't know. It's coming.
Yeah.
Something's
I'm not stressing. But I will, I still didn't play Shadow of the Damned or Lollipop Chainsaw, those like re-releases from last year, but I do want to play them. Like I have a goal in mind to like, I want to play all the Suda's games. When that will actually happen, we will see. So that's the news for the week. And because it's the first episode of the month, I'm going to read down all of the Japanese titles that are coming out for January. Even though it's already come out, Wuthering Waves for PS5 came out on New Year's, so that is now out. Ys Memoire, The Oath in Felghana, comes out tomorrow, January 7th, on PS5, Switch, and Steam. Freedom Wars Remastered comes out January 9th, PS5, PS4, Switch, and Steam. Donkey Kong Country Returns comes out on Switch January 16th. Dynasty Warriors Origins, PS5, Xbox Series, Windows, and Steam on January 17th. Are you excited about Dynasty Warriors?
No. Like, I'm going to check it out. But I would say, at least historically, when it comes to like Omega Force and like the Muso style games, I get more excited for the crossovers at this point. Like these are cool, but like
That's fair.
I'm always more excited for like, oh, like are we doing another Hyrule Warriors, Fire Emblem, Persona 5 why am I forgetting all
Dude, Persona 5 Strikers was
Strikers?
so good. It's so sad how like that game did not perform the way that it should
It did
have.
not, yeah. But generally speaking, I've enjoyed their like I love them working on other people's IPs. Like Dynasty
Yeah.
Warriors is cool and I'll check it out, but I'm usually a little less hype compared.
Yeah, I know. I have some friends that are big Dynasty Warriors fans, and they like really feel like that this is potentially going to be like this kind of like booster shot that this franchise really needs.
No, I
And
definitely
so
know a few fans that have been kind of doom and gloom about the franchise for the last few entries because it's like there just wasn't a lot of innovation happening, and it was just sort of like weapon variety was getting less. Like you went from games where there was like 40 plus different fighting styles, then it's like there's like 8, and it's like why? What's where is the game going? I've heard that sentiment as well. A lot of people are excited that this is going to be like the kind of like back on top for them.
Yeah. So I'm definitely open to checking it out. I'm not admittedly super into the Muso genre. I'm kind of like you, where I was like, yeah, I have the Hyrule Warrior games, I have Fire Emblem Warriors, I've played Persona 5 Strikers, but like I've never really played Dynasty Warriors like that. So, Tales of Grace's F Remastered coming out on PS5, PS4, Xbox Series, Xbox One, Switch, Windows, and Steam on January 17th. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is coming out on PC on the Steam and Epic Game Store on January 23rd. Sinduality Echo of Ada, PS5, Xbox Series, Windows, and Steam on January 23rd. I need to say something.
Oh boy.
I need to say something.
Here we go.
As I was like making the run of show yesterday, I had no idea what this game was. And it's a Bandai Namco game.
Yeah. So
it's like a major Bandai Namco release.
Yeah, no, and like a cross media one too, right? Isn't there like a tie-in anime and stuff too for it?
Yeah, it's about to take place before,
Yeah. I will say for my background on it, because I remember when it was first announced at a PlayStation State of Play, and I like big robots. I like mechs, like awesome, I'm in. So I remember seeing that first trailer for it, and I was like, okay, like I don't really know what's going on, but like I'm down, like let's check it out. And then I don't remember when like the follow-up was. It might have been at Tokyo Game Show or something like a year later. They were like, oh yes, this is our new, and what is it? Is it like 2v1 or something? There's multiplayer.
In solo it's a PvE, and then in multiplayer it's a PvPvE. So it's like it's kind of like the Dark Zone or whatever in the Division.
Gotcha.
Where it's like and so
so
I wish there was a co-op element though.
Yeah, that turns my brain off personally. Like I'm definitely more so into like I like my single player games. And like multiplayer's fine and co-op's good and like sure, but like the moment that I realized that like is a framework as a part of it, I dropped off. So yeah, I didn't realize that was coming out this month because I stopped paying attention like after that.
So I had no idea that this existed, and I watched the like gameplay and like trailers. I'm like, this looks cool. Like what the like. Where's the promotion behind this game? Like, I want to play. I want to check this game out. I want to play this game. I don't know, but yeah, that's coming out on January 23rd. And then the last game is Virtua Fighter 5 Revo for Steam, which is basically the Virtua Fighter 5 port for PC. So that comes out on January 23rd. So that's the releases for January. And now we're going to go into what we've been playing.
Starting with a little embargo break.
Yes. Ys Memoire, The Oath in Felghana, is a game that I have played. I have rolled credits on this game. It took me about like 10 hours to beat this game. Super short game. For those that don't know, Ys Oath in Felghana is a remake of Ys 3. It's been on Steam for a long time, but this is the PS5 Switch port. I played it on PS5, and it's a port. It's not like a remaster of the remake, right? Like so what you're getting is more or less just like the same as what you're getting on Steam. As I said before, I've been playing through the Ys series, and I was able to get to Oath of like in Felghana through Adel's life up to this point. So I like, perfect timing. The stars aligned. So I was I played it. I know that going into this, it is like one of the higher regarded Ys games. And overall, like I like the game. I like the game. Don't get me wrong. The combat is there's a fun fastness to the combat that you don't really even get in the like the current 3D iteration of Ys. And but also like the way that it can control sometimes is really weird, where like you will have a move where you can kind of like dive and like put your sword down to like stun an enemy, but like I never really figured out, like, is there a certain direction that I have to actually do this to make it work? Because sometimes you'll just jump and then you'll just swipe in the air and it's just like, okay. But then sometimes it will do it. And I'm like, okay. So I just had to get into this mindset where like, I just hope that this worked. So there was some goofiness to it.
That is silly. So for my own edification on this, because Ys is, again, I've played a handful of them, but it's not a series that I have paid super close attention to. I know at one point, style-wise across games, they made a transition from being like Adol is your main character, that's all you play, to having like kind of a light team approach, like you switch between characters and you're playing as. Is Felghana the former or the latter? Is this still like Adol only? There's no party, there's no other.
This is Adol only.
Okay.
This is Adol only. Yeah. I believe, I don't know about so like Memories of Celceta, which is the remake of 4.
Yeah.
I played that before Oath and Felghana.
That is one of the ones I played as well.
And that one had a party system.
Yeah.
I don't know if the original Ys 4 had a party system, but that is that and Nordics where you have Karja are the only times that you can use someone that's not Adol. So far.
Isn't I thought what was it, Lacrimosa and Nox, didn't those both have like other characters as well?
I have not gotten there yet.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm
talking about like from what I've played so far.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I think it was from what little I've looked at it, I think it was a thing where either starting at Celceta or I think it was the one right before that. That's when they started doing like, okay, we're gonna have a damage system where you have party members and Adol will be slash, but then you can get like someone that does blunt and someone that does stab, and like kind of became the new paradigm moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually really liked that aspect of when I played Memories of Celceta, because like it encouraged you to play other characters.
Yeah.
But I do think like playing as Adol and Oath and Felghana is really fun. You have they always try and implement if they do have magic in the game, they always implement it in different ways. So like in Nordics you have mana, and it's just like, oh, Adol has fire mana, Karja has ice mana. In this one, you get bracelets, and then the bracelets are of different elements. So you have like a fire bracelet that's basically like you throw fireballs. You have a wind bracelet that lets you like you spin around, and they use it as a traversal device too, which is really cool. So like if you have to jump to get across a large gap, you have to charge it up, and then when you jump, you let go, and it makes you fly farther. That's really that was really fun and cool. And then you get like an earth bracelet that allows you to like kind of charge through enemies, and it also like makes you not take any damage too while you're in that state. So the general like combat and how it all blends together is really good, really fun. I would probably, it's kind of hard because there are aspects of Oath and Felghana that I really liked, and while playing Memories of Celceta on the PS4 when it was clearly meant and designed for the Vita was a little staggering, to say the least. I did really like how that combat shaped up comparatively. Like, it's really hard for me to be like, oh, which one I liked more. I think they both work in their own respective spaces. And yeah, but what's cool about Oath and Felghana for me, as someone who has been playing this game throughout the events of Adol's life, is throughout each game, in the first game you meet this blue-haired dude named Dogi, and he's like kind of like Adel's partner. He's like the one that like travels with him wherever he goes. But also the games do a really bad job about making him included in what's going on. He kind of just like either isn't there at all, or they find some way to make him not there.
Yeah.
And it's like
I think doesn't
I understand.
doesn't Celceta start with like you guys on a ship and then just shipwrecks and he's gone, and like you find him later, but like
No, in the beginning you come back to a town and you don't know like any of your recent memories.
That's right.
And then you don't find out until like you don't see Dogi until like 3/4 of the game.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I'm going to help this person with this thing, which is why I'm not here the entire game. It's like, okay, whatever. But what's cool about Oath and Felghana is that Felghana is where Dogi is from. This is Dogi's home. So it's Dogi, and you meet this young girl named Elena, and then they have this brother. She has this brother named Chester, who is like serves as an antagonist for a lot of the game. And the characters in and of themselves in the story, I'm not going to go into spoilers, is especially being like a 8 to 10 hour game, was good. It was good. It wasn't anything that like lifted my skirt up, but it was like something. It's like that kind of reliable quality that you can expect from Falcom, right? And so I had a lot of fun with it. There's a good like variety of location and environments and enemies, and the boss fights are really fun. I had a lot of fun with it, but it's just like, it's a port. It's a solid port. It's not anything crazy, but I had a good time with it. And I think that like if it's on consoles now, it's a more accessible way to play it. Again, I played on PS5, so obviously the performance wasn't an issue. I really don't know how it's going to perform on Switch. I did play a demo of Oath and Felghana at Anime Expo last year, and that was on Switch, and I didn't feel any issues with the performance there. So take that for what you will. But yeah, Oath and Felghana's fun game, really cool. I'm excited to get to Ys 8 now. Ys 8 is like the next one in line, and that's what people regard as the best Ys game, like, and one of Falcom's best games in general. So very excited about playing Ys 8. Kevin.
So coming from the standpoint of just, audience listening in right now, let's say, like a certain me, that you aren't in-depth familiar with Ys. Is this one to start on, or do you think like it's a little advanced, maybe go start with Celceta or something else? Like, would this be an okay intro?
I think outside of starting specifically with Ys 2, because Ys 1 and 2 are actually kind of like intertwined, I think you can start with any Ys game. Like, you can. Like, they serve as like their own self-contained adventures.
Sure.
But like, again, if you start with 1 and then you meet Dogi in 1, you're gonna know this character as your kind of traveling companion throughout the series. But if you don't, then you're gonna be like, who's this blue-haired dude? Like, that's really the only main connection that you're gonna be like, yo, who's this guy? You know what I mean?
What I understand of the Ys franchise is that 1 and 2 are directly connected, and then every other story is standalone, and it's just a series of Adel traveling the world and like keeps stumbling into just things to deal with. Like, oh, you crash landed here, and now you got to solve these people's problems. Sorry.
Yeah.
And he does that
really
like 8 times across his life in 10 years. That man has been through so much, as far as I can tell. Like, he needs a vacation.
Oh, yeah.
Like, just like relax for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but he loves adventure. That's his true love. So
that's fair.
But yeah, any is good. I think most people, if they were to tell you, they'd probably say 8, because 8 was like the first game where they, the current model of what Ys games are. But you can really start anywhere. So and I think Ys 1 in particular is really good, like really good. I don't know if I would say it's my favorite Ys game, but I think story-wise, like the first 2 games like together is definitely my favorite story so far. Like, I really like the kind of the world that they kind of introduce and build in those first two games, but also like the combat is really kind of weird where it has this whole bump system where you're like you have to kind of angle yourself uh against the enemies in the right way to actually deal damage to them, because if you hit them head on then you take damage. It's cool, but it's also like this is something I've never really experienced before,
Right.
and you have to kind of really get used to that.
Interesting.
But yeah, you can really start with any Ys.
Neat.
Kevin, what are you playing?
Okay, so I'm currently in the middle of a lot of catch up, like a lot of catch up.
Okay.
And there's things I'm currently catching up on that I don't want to talk too much about because I feel like I'm just like at a midpoint where I need to just see it through the rest of the way. So what I want to talk about today, I actually finished a decent ways back, but it's a game that I think hasn't been talked about as much out of the 24 JRPG releases, and partially for good reason. Visions of Mana.
Okay.
I want to talk about this one because like I'm a huge fan of the older classical Mana games, like Seiken Densetsu 3, Trials of Mana, Legend of Mana, like all like just high stuff for me. So it was really hyped to see a new entry come out last year. And Visions is fine. Like it's fine. Like it's like I would say good, but I also think it's a bit of a there's some onboarding, I think, for anyone that like tries to play that one first. Because it is absolutely a game that has its blemishes and is rough around the edges. I think one of the biggest things it does that kind of shoots itself in the foot a little bit is that, so one of the big things they wanted to make a center focus of this game, for anyone that's not familiar with Mana games in general, actually, let me like rewind real quick. Mana is like an older Square Enix RPG franchise that is action RPG. Like back in the SNES, it was top-down action, but there was RPG elements mixed in that differentiated a little bit from stuff like, say, Zelda. You know, less puzzle solving, more leveling up. Great. And so one of the things they really wanted to focus on with Visions of Mana is like, hey, we're going to go, it's going to be full 3D, we're going to do a 3D action system, but we're also going to bring back favorite stuff from old games, like a class system, so everyone can change classes, and that changes their movesets. And that stuff's cool. Like, that's, like, I eat that up. That stuff's fantastic in the game. Where it shoots itself in the foot a little bit is that the classes are paced out, and they also unlock, like, core combat kit stuff. So at the very beginning, you're just doing, like, I have a 3-hit combo, and I can dash. And that's what I'm doing for the first, like, 4 hours of this game. Let's go. And eventually you actually get, like, more core kit stuff where it's like, oh, now I can do a charge slash. Now I can do, like, this one aerial attack with, like, certain weapons. And so, like, combat by late game actually gets not super deep. Like, it's not Devil May Cry or anything. You're not going to get, like, a full action game experience. But, like, there's at least some combo depth that you can do by late game. But it takes a while to get there, which can be, I think, kind of rough for anyone first coming in. It's so simple at the start.
You know what combat system you're describing right now?
Oh no, where are we going?
Kingdom Hearts.
But like
Kingdom Hearts is like that.
But like even simpler, because like Kingdom Hearts doesn't limit you as hard as like, so for instance with things like spells and special abilities, you can slot those, but a lot of them are very simple and straightforward, and like there's a couple that you're going to start getting in your rotation, but it mostly comes down to like, I'm fighting water enemies, I need to make sure I use fire skills. And there's also just like a bit of a stiffness to the combat. Like I think even when Kingdom Hearts is at its like simplest form, there's a flow to how combat feels that there's like a rigidity to Visions where it's like like you're just doing your it's just very rigid feeling, and not like the most like in it right away for the combat. So yeah, I feel like it's a rough one to get into. I overall liked it. Like, I think it's fine. I don't think I would necessarily tell people like, oh, if you want to get into Mana, you should start here. I feel like it's more of, oh, do you like Mana and you just need another game? Like you need a fix after how many years of not getting a new one? Awesome. Here's another one to play. Like it's solid in that respect, but like I wouldn't necessarily rank it high in the franchise. Like I feel like I would definitely tell someone to play, like even the Trials remake is a better way. Like if you want to play a 3D Mana game, like start there in my mind.
Oh really? Okay, interesting. Yeah, I remember previewing the Trials of Mana, and I was like, I thought it was fine. I wasn't like crazy about it, but like I've never really dove into the Mana series. I have like the Secret of Mana remake. I have the Trials of Mana remake. I haven't bought Vision of Mana yet, but like it just just didn't happen.
Yeah.
That's like one of the few JRPGs that I just like kind of had to skip out on in 2024. But because that's just kind of how like my brain works. I was like, oh, like a new entry of a series I've never played before. Let me play all the previous ones because I like to see how the series evolves over time.
Absolutely. And like if
That's
you
kind of
have that if you have that ability to go back, like that's the way to do it, right? Because I know there's some people where they just can't. Like you give them, and like, and I don't even mean it as a shameful thing. There's some people where you give them an NES or SNES game, and they're like, I can't. Why is this look this way? I can't do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like when I think of a recent one, I feel like Trials 3D, but I agree. Like playing the actual series in order if you can is definitely a better way to get into it. And I think part of the problem too is that like Mana as a series is one that I think is heavily vibes based. Like there are specific mechanics and things I can point to as what made them fun. Like being able to do local co-op back on the SNES was really cool for Secret of Mana. The way they have like a branching class system and branching plot in Trials of Mana was like really awesome for its time, and it's aged fairly well playing it in the remake. And I think where Visions loses that a little bit is they were like, okay, like we're gonna make like we're going to have a class system and we're going to have combat, and like they have all the things that in a checklist are like, yeah, like cool, this should be in a Mana game, but like it doesn't hit quite right the right vibes, which some of which might just be lost to nostalgia, to be honest. Like some of it might just be like, this might just be a series that as much as I would love to have a new one that I love, it might just not be something they can revive, because like there's something about playing like a SNES or PS1 version of it that just hits right.
Yeah, it's one of those things I feel like with a lot of JRPGs is where like if a JRPG series has like two like really solid entries back to back, people like really like get behind that franchise, and then it just kind of starts declining over time, and it's just like, dang, like maybe the series just isn't what like it used to be, or like is and it's
or
not
like,
going to be that way.
Yeah, or even just current talent isn't sure what to do with it. Like this is something I was talking about, like not a JRPG, but I was talking recently about like Star Fox, where like I feel like Nintendo doesn't know what to do with Star Fox right now, because you have people who love like Star Fox 64, and like there are people who still enjoy some of the ones that came after it, but it's really a series where like the peak was back then, right? And so every time there's a new one, it's like, are they going to figure out what made that one cool, and like I'm going to be into this one again? Nope, never mind. And there's absolutely a lot of RPGs that I think fall into that pit trap a bit, and Mana would be one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I still want to play the series, still want to check it out.
Yeah,
but
like I said, I walked away liking it. I just definitely wouldn't be like, this should be your first Mana game. Like, there's others I think that are better, getting you into what like made them special, I think. For
sure. Anything else that you played?
Otherwise, like I said, I'm currently in the middle of doing catch up, so I'm working on Rebirth and Metaphor both right now, which I'm enjoying thoroughly. I would say, as far as like which of the two is getting my brain going a little more, I would lean towards Metaphor. There are some blemishes and things that I think Atlas experimenting with changing to this style of game, like it's Persona, but it's not at the same time, right? Like there are some pretty important changes to the formula. And I think some of it they really nail, and some of it kind of shows they weren't necessarily thinking for that style of game right away. Like certain parts of the class mechanics bother me a little bit.
I agree with you.
But also like the frickin' road tripping and the way they've adapted and updated the calendar system is fantastic. Obviously, Monster. I mean, like this is a game that has been up for multiple Game of the Year awards and stuff. Like, no surprise, it's really good. There just 100%. Are some things that I'm noticing that are like holding it just a tiny bit back for me. Still one of my favorite releases last year, and it might end up being my Game of the Year once I finish it retroactively. Then Rebirth is, I'm enjoying it. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but we don't need to eat that up right now.
Yeah, we don't need that.
That's a whole thing.
That's my I mean, Metaphor and Rebirth were my 1 and 2 respectively last year. With Daybreak at 3rd. So it was a banger year for JRPGs last year.
It was, and I'm so behind right now. I finished a bunch, but not those two. Strangely enough, like the biggest ones.
So the other game that I played that I recently rolled credits on was Dragon Quest IV. I
Hmm.
played the on the DS.
And you did
And
finish 3 HD2D, right?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm playing through the Dragon Quest games in order, the mainline games in order. So I've played 1, 2, 3, and 3 HD2D remake, and I've rolled credits on 4.
For real quick, 1,
And
2, and 3, what version did you play? Like, were you going back
I
to like
played
Game Boy, or were you doing the ones that
no,
are
I
on
played the
Switch?
Switch versions.
Okay,
I played the Switch versions.
cool.
Yeah. No, no. Would not be able. Like that's where I'm gonna probably tap out. Where I'm like, I can't do that one. But yeah. So I played all of those, and I just rolled credits on 4. And I went into 4 really like excited because I feel like Dragon Quest 4 is kind of like the Dragon Quest or the Final Fantasy 9 of Dragon Quest, where people will be like the people that love Dragon Quest 4 love Dragon Quest 4. Like they're like, this is absolutely amazing. This is like one of, if not the best Dragon Quest game, like that type of thing. So
Right, peak cinema.
I yeah, exactly. So I was really excited. And you know, there's gonna be for this specific thing, there's gonna be spoilers. This is an old game, so I'm gonna talk about specific things. And so going into Dragon Quest 4, I was really excited. And immediately, like probably like 30 minutes into the game, I'm like, oh, this is very different from what the past 3 Dragon Quest games are, where they separate the characters into chapters. It's kind of like Octopath Traveler-esque, where like you have the prologue or like the beginning where you are the hero, and then chapter 1 you're playing as one of the party members, Ragnar, who's like the warrior, the knight in this game. And then chapter 2 is Elena with Kirill and I forgot the old man's name, Boria. And then chapter 3 is Torneko, who's this merchant, and then 4 is Mina and Maya, who are these like twins. And then chapter 5 is the hero, and then you meet everybody, and then you do the adventure stuff. And while that chapter is notably longer than the other chapters, it's still not that long. Like you are playing as the hero for like 35% of this game. Like it took me about 30 to 35 hours to beat this game. And I would say that I was playing as the hero for 8, maybe 10 hours. And so I was just like, what's up with this? What's up with this? And like, while I like the character, I think the characters and the character designs go crazy in Dragon Quest 4. Like Toriyama was in his bag, like more than normal. And I think that if I played Dragon Warrior 4 on the NES back then, I would think super highly of that game to this day. Like you know, and I know that some of the people that do think highly of Dragon Quest 4, it's because they played the original. Because like yeah, the character designs are crazy, super cool. They're like, hey, I'm just, and then like Yuji Horii, just like I'm just imagining them in the meeting room, and Yuji Hori's like, what if we build a princess that throws hands? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
we have a princess character be a brawler, and it's just like, that's awesome, you know? And so, like, I think Elena's chapter, story-wise, was the only one outside of the main story that really grabbed me, that really, like, I really cared about what was going on. But, like, overall, the story stuff didn't really grab me in the same way like Dragon Quest 3 did. Dragon Quest 3, I was like, I liked the story a lot more. I liked what, like, the things that we were doing in the world, like the purpose, like the mission behind it all. Like I enjoyed that a lot more. But I think that Dragon Quest 4 has a lot of really cool gameplay moments. Like like both that are just like very minuscule or miscellaneous, but then also just like mainstream stuff that's cool too. Like I really love how in the first half of Torneko's chapter, you were literally just a merchant that goes to work every day and sells shit.
Yep.
That's all you do.
Gotta do your job. You're a
And I thought that ruled. I thought that was great. That was really cool. But and then it was really cool when when you find the gas canister and then you go to Riverton, I think is the name of the town, and you go to this scientist and he's just like, "All right, I'm going to build something for you." And then you go to bed next day, you have a hot air balloon. You're traveling the world in a hot air balloon. I'm like, what a creative, like, inspired choice.
Yeah.
To do that, because when you play enough Dragon Quest, specifically starting with Dragon Quest 3, you kind of get the sense of like, oh, every Dragon Quest game, you're eventually going to get some sort of flying thing that's going to allow you to fly around the map. You have you have like the dragon in Dragon Quest 3, spoilers. But then in Dragon Quest 4, I was just like, I just kind of expected it would be something of the similar vein, but no, it's a hot air balloon. I'm like, that's so cool. Like, I really like that. Yeah. But I also think that the main story is just like not super interesting. Like the main villain, his name is Sorrow. It's like P-S-A-R-O. Yeah. So you get like a little bit of like flashback to his story where like he's trying to save this girl named Rose. And you get that one flashback. And then when you end up actually finding him at the end of the game, he's no longer actually Sorrow. He's like he's become like this, I forgot the actual title, but he's like the
big bad
this evil
yeah.
This big evil thing.
You absorbed enough evil energy that you turn into the big bad evil thing.
Yeah, and he doesn't have any memories of his past self. And I'm just like, oh. So I'm just killing some big monster thing. Like, And
eventually, you get a whole game that's just playing as him as a kid. So, like
yeah, he's in the Dragon Quest 3, Monsters 3, yeah. Yep. But yeah, so I was like, the story didn't really like grab me, and like I wasn't a huge fan of like a lot like the structure. Like I appreciate that they tried something. Like that's the thing. Like I'm not like down on this game because they tried something and I didn't care for it. I don't think it's a bad game. It just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
That's not like what I wanted.
Right.
But I appreciate that they did it.
Yeah, and it is an experimental game in a lot of ways, right? Like it's doing some things that I think we take for granted now as being like fairly stock in RPGs, but especially when you look at it in the context of like Dragon Quest 1, 2, 3, and the 4. 4 was the first one where I feel like you actually have like characterization to the party members, and I think that was part of their experiment was to be like, oh, well, you're going to spend time with Ragnar and learn who Ragnar is, and then you're going to spend time with these characters and learn about who they are, because before then you had the hero in 1, the heroes in 2, and then you create a party in 3 where you're the hero and the lead, and it's all very like you are all silent protagonist main character syndrome. Like you're the good guys doing the good things to save the day, right? Yeah. And so I think that was the experiment with 4 was like, okay, well, what if we actually have like a cast, like an actual cast? And it was them figuring that out and wanting to actually spend time with them instead of focusing on the main character, who is, again, the silent protagonist, right? So yeah. I can see how that like doesn't click for you. Like I dig 4. It's not my favorite. I know people who are diehard, like that's the best one. But like I can see how, especially like getting into the series later, like how it just doesn't hit quite the same.
Yeah, like again, I don't think it's a bad game.
Yeah.
Again, if I, it's one of those things where like, it's hard, right? When you get into when you experience these games where you're like, I don't think that this is like objectively bad, or like even subjectively like a bad game.
Sure.
It's just not for me. Yeah. It doesn't click with me the way that like I wanted it to, or it just wasn't it.
Yeah.
And so like I would still like give it like 8.5 out of 10 type game. Like it's Dragon Quest is like, it's still amazing, it's still great, but like it's just what I wanted from it, or what I want from a Dragon Quest game, or what I want from a JRPG in a bigger extent, which we'll get to later in the topic of the show. Like that just wasn't there for me. And so I still think it is a good game, just not for me as much. Um, and that's that. That's Dragon Quest IV. I have Dragon Quest V next, which a lot of people say is the best one. And
5 is
like,
very good. 5
I am.
It's another different one though. Like that's the thing with Dragon Quest is a lot of people think of it as being like a safe series in a sense because they're all very old timey feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them actually do kind of weird things, especially when compared to each other. And 5 has some interesting, wacky choices. I'm very curious to see how you feel about that one because
I won't say my thoughts yet, but I have already put in a good chunk of time in that game. So but I'm not gonna like go delve into my thoughts, but I'm just in general like excited because most people say it's one of those things where like kind of like Final Fantasy, right? Like depending on who you ask, 6,
Sure.
7, 10, like those are like the
Yeah.
most beloved. Like Dragon Quest 5, 8, 11, those are like the most beloved. So like, but I feel like most people say 5. 5 is like the one.
Yeah,
And
it depends a
so
little bit on like what you're specifically into. Like, yeah, 5 is a very common pick.
yeah, so I'm really excited about 5. And also just like getting a DS copy of that game, like because I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are probably like very much like, oh, just emulate it. I'm not an emulation guy, like in very most cases, and also like I like to collect games physically, and so I'm like I want that shit on my shelf.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, getting a copy of that game was pricey, to say the least.
That's trust me, I understand. The one as far as having a entry in Dragon Quest, I have a physical copy of every single one mainline except 6, and that is not cheap. on DS.
No,
It is not a small number. But it is the missing. It's been the missing one for a while for me, and I just every now and then I look at the price. Should I have grabbed it sooner? Probably, but it's just bad. It is not an affordable number.
no, it's bad. It's bad. But yeah, so I'm excited to play 5 and give you my my thoughts on 5 in the future.
Yeah.
But now we're gonna go into the topic of the show.
And this will only take about 3 hours given the complexity of it.
Kevin, I have a question for you.
Yeah. What's the question?
What is a JRPG?
What is a man? So, do you want me just to give you my answer right now, like where I stand on the subject? Because here's the thing with JRPGs, right? Like, I feel like, first off, RPG alone is like a debatable term. Like that already, it's just a massive minefield. JRPG specifically, if you just set aside the other aspect of just what makes something an RPG, I feel like there's two main overarching camps, and even within those, there's arguments, debates. But there's two ways you can go about it. You can take the very literal definition of the term, right? Japanese RPG. It's an RPG. It's made in Japan. Done. I don't agree with that approach.
Yeah.
Although it is a much simpler, clean dividing line that you can go with, right? The other approach is what I would say is like vibes-based JRPG definition, where like I feel like a lot of it results from here are these games that were a big deal, like in the late 80s, early 90s, that all had a lot of similar shared characteristics, and that became known as like the JRPG formula. And even amongst those, there's so much variety, right? Like when you talk about a JRPG, you can still have action games. You can still have things that are real time. It's not all turn-based. But there is a sense of consistency. And so like the big difference in definitions with this, right, is that if we're going with the super literal version, Dark Souls is a JRPG. And I don't know if I fully agree with that. You know what I mean?
It's not a JRPG.
And at the same time, in a kind of reverse version, something like, say, Sea of Stars is not a JRPG because it has all the trappings and styles and is based on them, but it's made by Canadians. You know, so like, it's not a JRPG anymore. So that's why I don't like the hyper literal approach to it. But it is a much cleaner approach than like, look, man, I know a JRPG when I see it.
But it's true though, because the thing is, like, some background of this, NIS had me on a panel at Anime Expo, basically being like, "What is a JRPG?"
Right.
And Kevin was at that panel. He watched that hanging out, and that was one of the things that I said. I was just like, "Listen, you just know it when you see it," and It's true. It's in the similar vein as vibes, right? Like it is a you know it when you see it. The vibe check is like it passes the vibe check.
Yeah.
There's
if I wanted to get technical with it, I feel like the way that I would approach it, right, is that technically JRPG is almost like a scale, right? Like how JRPG is this game? And there are certain qualities that crop up really often, whether that's there's a party or it is turn-based or there is like this kind of system in place. Like I don't have a formalized list ready right now to talk about, but I feel like that's if you wanted to have a technical approach to it, that's how I would go about it, is that there are certain things that come up more often than not. None of them individually is like a hard requirement because, again, you can absolutely have a JRPG that has one main character and that's it. You can have a JRPG that is real time and not turn-based. But, like, the more of those things you have, the more I'm like, oh, that's definitely a JRPG.
Yeah, because it's one of those things where, like, and this might be a hot take for some people, like, Final Fantasy 16 is not a JRPG.
Ooh.
That is an action game. It's not a JRPG.
I overall agree. I agree. I think it is a game that has a lot of JRPG trappings. I think it tried to keep certain things around to be like, see, it's still a JRPG, but I do agree with you. I don't for me it does not feel like a JRPG. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I still think
it's just not like and it's Square Enix, right? It's Final Fantasy. It is like the JRPG franchise. It's not a JRPG. It's an action game. Like, yes, you have the fluidity to change, like using the different icons to use different powers and stuff. And there is like a sense of role playing with that. Sure, like I'm not going to deny that, but outside of that, it's very lacking in any sort of like traditional JRPG aspects.
Like I actually equate it more to like a Asura's Wrath than anything else. Like I feel like that game captures a lot of it's Asura's Wrath with like a little bit of RPG thrown in and more like actual exploration because that game's very much on the rails. But yeah, and like even to have that comparison, right? So the issue here isn't that it's an action game, right? Because for instance, if I asked you if FF7 Rebirth is JRPG, you would say
it is. Yeah, it's an action RPG. Yeah.
Which like
I'm saying
it's still I'm just clarifying that like the action is not the issue, right? It's a lot of
but it's just like it is a pure action game is what is the best way that I'm explaining it. Like yes, you level up. Yes, you have like those aspects that you expect from a JRPG or an RPG. But like if we look on the Western side of things, right? Like we're not gonna try and say here that like Horizon Zero Dawn, Forbidden West is an RPG. It's not.
Right.
It's not like sure you have
elemental
chat
weaknesses
logs
and you have
chat logs or like chat options, right? Choices that you can make, but does it affect the story? No. Oh, okay. Well then, does it affect Aloy's characterization in any real way? No. It's not an RPG. Like it's not an RPG. You level up in that game. It's not an RPG.
Yeah.
Like it's just one of those things where, and granted, this is more or less all subjective, but that's just how
like the moment
I see it.
The moment you commit to not taking the hyper literal version of what a JRPG is, it's all subjective. I'm sure plenty of people listening right now, right? They're like, it absolutely is just RPGs that are Japanese. I don't know why you would ever consider anything else to count. And there are people listening who probably agree with that concept, but then disagree with some of the specific examples we're giving, right? Where they're like, no, like 16's a JRPG. Like it's Final Fantasy. Like it's one of those things where I feel like so much of it is informed by what you played and what introduced you to the genre and like what has almost become the internal canon for you, right? Like, oh, these are the games that really shaped my understanding of what a JRPG is, and that informs how I view all these later games as a result, you know?
And I'm really glad that you said that because like for me, when I was introduced by JRPGs, like a lot of people, through Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
And like Pokemon Crystal, still my second favorite game of all time to this day. And growing up, whenever anyone said JRPG, I immediately thought simply turn-based combat.
Mm-hmm.
That was my definition of a JRPG.
Sure.
And then when we got introduced to when I get introduced to things like Kingdom Hearts, and like it's like, oh, Kingdom Hearts is a JRPG. Like it's it's Japanese, it's action, it's really a role playing game. Like that's a JRPG, and I'm like, oh shit, I always took it for like turn based combat. And people were like, no, but I was like a kid,
Sure.
so like
Well,
I
that
was
was a
like
very
8 years
common,
old.
yeah. Well, that was a very common assumption, especially back in like that time, because yeah, like a lot of people's
Most
introductions was
JRPGs were turn based.
yeah, or some variant of it, right? Like Final Fantasy was technically ATB, which is like a little different, but still,
Yeah,
like it still had you entering commands while people wait in a line and then walk up and hit something.
yeah,
And unless you happen to also get into like Star Ocean, early Tales, even like the mana games I was mentioning earlier, like those get considered
yes,
JRPGs, but like, I mean, see, like the original mana game is basically a Zelda-like, and then Secret got a little more RPG in it, and that I think solidified more the idea of, oh, this is a JRPG now. Um, yeah, it really is a very subjective thing informed by like where you cut your teeth into the genre and like how you've come to almost personally understand it in some ways.
yeah. And just to kind of even further that, like at least speaking for myself,
Hmm?
one of my most anticipated games this year is Expedition 33. That's a
Yeah.
JRPG, baby. That's
Yeah.
a JRPG, baby.
It's certainly wearing its inspiration on its sleeve, right? Like that's it's like what I
Yeah.
said Sea of Stars earlier, right? Like it's made by Canadians, but like their whole point was, oh, we love Super Mario RPG and Chrono Trigger, and we wanted to make a new game that has those elements that recaptures it for us. And so like, yeah, it's walking, talking, doing all the things like it. It's just it happened to be made in North America, like not
Yeah.
not in Japan. And so yeah, same deal with Expedition 33, where it's like I think they're French, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, and clearly inspired by the kind of later high fidelity era of turn-based RPGs, where we haven't really had a new one in ages, honestly. Like the last one I can ever think of is like Lost Odyssey, which was a 360 game early
Oh,
at that.
I need to play Lost Odyssey. I need to play that.
So like, yeah, it's Final Fantasy 12 is the running joke sometimes.
Oh, okay.
Like it's like the actual 12 and to some people. But yeah, like that concept of a high fidelity but turn-based people are lined up RPG, right? Like that's a JRPG made by the French.
Yeah, and then like there's other aspects too, as like just like the art style, right? Like
Mhm.
it's like, oh, anime characters, and that's the thing, and like that's the thing that I think that actually kind of hurts JRPGs, which is really frustrating. Like I think that like a lot of people haven't played like Trails and like other games of like its art style. It's because like, oh, that's an anime game.
Yeah.
That can't be like a high quality game like Final Fantasy
Sure.
or Dragon Quest, where they have like a more distinct art style. And that's like kind of the thing. Like 'cause at least with like, because Kingdom Hearts, you could argue like there is like an anime-ness to it as well.
Sure.
But at least with that, you have the Disney influence
Yeah.
that like makes it more approachable.
Yeah. And then you look at
for those type of people.
Yeah, and then you look at something like Persona, where like it's definitely anime inspired, like visually, but it's also hyper stylized to a degree that no one else is really doing.
Yeah.
So like it's able to stand on its own 2 feet, like further in that particular direction. Yeah, I mean that's always been a classic issue of just equating things with anime. And the thing is, when someone complains that like, oh, well, I just don't like things that are anime, it's like, what does that actually mean? Because I've absolutely fallen prey to that. Like I've said that sometimes before, and I've realized that when I say it, I usually what I mean is actually, oh no, this is just extremely shonen coded in a way that I don't care for. Because I have seen my share of shonen anime and played games with shonen style plots, and you can only have the power of friendship so many times in a row before you get a little tired. So like, like I get it, but at the same time, it's like people need to sometimes think about if they do say that, like, what does that actually mean though? Like, what is your issue here, other than art style?
Yeah, because when people say like, "Oh, it's the art style," I just tell them, "Yo, you got to get over that shit." Like, you're putting a limiter on yourself,
right,
to experience like high quality video games and things like that. And so there are actual issues with like Trails that outside of not not even outside of that, like that is that are just criticisms. Like those games can be really tropey in the like Japanese tropes and like over sexualization of like young underage women, and it's just like, we don't need to do this. We don't need to do this.
And that's an issue that crops up across a few games, right? Like I mean, Tales is very tropey, over the top. That's like probably the tropiest series for a while. I definitely know for like specifically Xenoblade 2, like bothered a lot of people,
Yeah.
both for
Yeah.
sexualization and also for like it has a little more of that shonen energy I was talking about earlier. More so than the other Xenoblade games, I would say. Yeah. Like it's being specific.
What do you look for in a JRPG? Like what do you want when it comes to JRPGs? What are you going to a JRPG for?
Yeah. A few things. I think for me, because I've thought about this question a lot before, and one of the number one things, and I've certainly enjoyed games that don't do this, but one of the number one things for me is like a sense of the party, right? Like I love casts. I love the adventuring party. I think that roots back a little bit to like, some of the games that I was cutting teeth on with stuff like the earlier Final Fantasies, a lot of the PS1 era stuff, Breath of Fire. Like a lot of these games always focused on having the party. And that's something that comes and goes a little bit, and there are definitely franchises that don't have them, but that's always a huge thing for me. Like even when talking about like 16 versus 7 Rebirth, I enjoy both. I'm not going to get into like, what is truly whatever great. But when it comes to, RPG factor and what I enjoy, I absolutely love how 7 Remake and Rebirth make the party relevant, right? Like you swap between people. There are times where one character might be especially relevant for taking down certain enemies. There are combo moves in Rebirth for rewarding having certain pairs of characters out. Awesome stuff. 16. There's other people. There's NPCs. They join you sometimes. They occasionally help hold an enemy off, maybe, but they're just kind of there. And it's mostly just the Clive show, And so that was like a big thing that bothered me a lot, was how much a lot of the supporting cast felt not really that present to me. Like they had moments, but they weren't central in the way that like a lot of other ones are for me that like really clicks.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Like I think that the sense of the party is definitely a top 3 thing for me. Because I think that like because I also think that my favorite JRPG party is the Liberal party from the Trails in the Sky games. And the reason why I like that party so much is not only are they just great characters in of themselves, but they also like are great ways of like informing the player and like the main character of the world that exists outside of that country that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So you have someone from Erebonia, you have someone from Calvard, you have someone that has had experiences around Zemuria, because she's like basically like the real world equivalent of like a gypsy, right? Like she's traveled around the world, and like and then like there's a kid who's like the granddaughter of like this guy who was like the disciple of the person that like basically created technology or electricity as we know it in that world. Like there's just like, all these like character connections and tie-ins that like make that world feel so real and lived in, that just like made that series, like that group of characters, so special to me.
Sure.
And that goes into other ways too, right? Like of course like the Final Fantasy VII party, right, is a great party for a myriad of different reasons. And just like depending on who you ask, there's like just so many other iconic video game parties. And I do think that it's really just like how those characters bounce off each other, but also play into the story as a whole. Because like I think that we see a lot of JRPGs where the party members kind of have like their own little arc during like that feels more of a pit stop.
Sure.
Of the main story.
Yeah. I was actually talking about this at a New Year's party recently where we were talking about favorite Final Fantasies. And I mentioned one of the ones that it's probably not my number one, but I tend to rank it pretty high. And I think I rank it higher than most, maybe. I really like FF10. And one of the things I like a lot about 10 is that more so than a lot of other Final Fantasies, the whole party feels significant to what's going on. Like Kimahri's probably the most like subdued kind of, but there's still like an in-character reasoning why he chooses to stick around and why everyone's adventuring together. Whereas when you look at some older ones, some of this has been updated in like FF7 Remake, for instance. Yuffie just kind of shows up and has like one side story in 7 and doesn't even show up for like the CGI scenes. Vincent also has like backstory tie-ins, but like isn't a significant role in terms of how things are playing out right now. Or even like 9. I love 9. 9 is the one that I usually end up saying is my favorite. And like, I can't explain to you why Amarant hangs out. He's just like, oh man, I wanted to fight Zidane, and then he won, and like, I'm gonna hang out in the party now. It's just like, cool, like he's here. Like 9 really has like a main forecast, and then 4 other people that had reasons to at least show up for a bit and now stick around because they're part of the party now.
Yeah. I mean, because like, and that's where you have to get into like the real nitty gritty of like, oh, like you're right about this, but this is why I think it works still. Sure. Like, because like you're totally right about Yuffie and like Vincent, but I'm also just like, yeah, but like she is like the character that like brings all the Wu-Tai stuff like into perspective, and then like Vincent's like, yeah, you're right, but then like
if you happen to run into her in the forest. The original.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's the thing, she's literally.
But then you have like Vince's like, yeah, but you also get like the history of like the Turks, and then you get like there's things that like make the overarching world and builds on the world. But so it's like one of those things like I like when it does both, where you have those characters that will build the world around and make it feel more real and lived in, but also they are a key component to the main story and not serving as like, oh, they have this arc that serves as a pit stop during the main story. Like I want it all to like feel natural and feel purposeful from beginning to end. Like, yeah, like for example, like the Cornell stuff with Barrett, like yes, it does kind of feel like a pit stop, but like we know that Barrett's like everything that Barrett's been doing is key stuff for the story, like as it's been going on. And so like it, for me, that like that is okay. It is really like it's really hard to kind of find that perfect blend where you do get like the best of both worlds for me. And I think that the Liberal crew specifically is like has been the best that I've seen that executed across 2 games. Granted.
Okay, so party, I think we've definitely agreed is like, again, not a hard requirement, but certainly a major touchstone for the genre. What would you add as like another major one?
I mean, I just think like the main thing is I play JRPGs for stories. Like I like this is like, this is my version of fantasy novel reading, right? Or like sci-fi novel reading where you want to escape into this world and you want to care about these characters. And like and I think especially something I mentioned because when I was on the other panel talking about JRPG stories is like I want to care about saving the world. I want the game to be like, this is why saving this world matters. And like obviously we can get into like these are people, like these are the morality stuff, like, but like getting past the obvious like just general morality stuff, it's just like, why should I care? Why should I care about saving this world? And is the threat an engaging threat, like a threat that like an interesting villain or antagonist, or that's how I feel.
You wording this way makes me very excited for when we talk about Chrono Trigger, however many months from now, because there's some of what you're touching on here. I don't want to get too into it because I don't want you to think of things ahead of time.
No problem.
Yeah, and also going back to when I watched you guys on the panel, I do think something that was interesting brought up in terms of, because one thing that a lot of time was spent on was sort of differentiating between like the JRPG and then like the Western RPG, right? And an interesting thing that I think does come up often when you look at those two, and there's always exceptions, but a general trend tends to be that JRPGs have there is a story you're playing out, right? Like you as a player are really more of a viewer. Like you're doing things in combat and you're doing things where like you're making sure they succeed, but like you're not affecting the story really. Whereas a lot of Western RPGs tend to put emphasis on things like, oh, make choices, and like you're going to get different ending slides depending on what factions you helped out or how you did this. And there are some JRPGs that touch on this a little bit, but they're oftentimes also, I think, a little more rigid, where it's like, for instance, Tactics Ogre is one I go back to a lot, where there's choices, but there's really like two choices that really matter and have a major impact and split the story in a specific way. Because ultimately, there's three different main storylines of like ways the story can play out, and you just picking which of those you want to see. You know, I think there tends to be a heavier emphasis on like there is a specific story trying to be told here, and not necessarily a player power fantasy of you are the person making your character saving the day, or playing the bad guy doing things the way you want. There's a different goal with the stories, certainly.
Yeah, no, I agree. And to be clear, I love a good choice-based storyteller,
Yeah,
but
100%.
I like how there is this what's the word I'm looking for? It's just like the set in stone story, and you're just experiencing the events as you get to them, and
Sure.
like
Well,
there are no choices that are going to
yeah.
determine the outcome of certain things.
Yeah, well, and there's narrative strengths to that, right? Like, if the game
100%.
gives you tons of choices and ways for things to play out, there are lots of ways to circumvent what might have been actual interesting dramatic tension, or what might have been like, proper comeuppance for a certain character, or having some kind of interesting sense of irony happening with something. Like you can choose to have those things not happen in a game that's heavily focused on multiple outcomes to things. But a JRPG, if there is a specific story trying to be told, it's like, no, this is how this is going to play out, and this is going to be this person's arc, because this is a central aspect of like how they develop and how the world they're in and the story they're experiencing has shaped them. Like there is a lot more control on the author's part of what they want you to see and experience with that.
Yeah. And then I would say like the last big thing for me, after like, well, not even after, but just goes along with like this just general story, like and like wanting to caring about saving the world that I'm in and things like that, as well as like a great party, is the sense of adventure.
Mm.
I think that when I finish a game, I think I can get a sense of how much I really enjoyed it when I can think about like the numerous like key moments that I experienced throughout that story and throughout that adventure. Like, and using Dragon Quest 3 as a good like as a easy example of this, like, you know, getting to the pyramid and being like, oh, I'm just like this random pyramid that I'm getting into, and then like, oh, there are these trap floorings, and like, oh, I can't use magic here, and you have to get to the top of the pyramid, and it's like, what a cool dungeon. And then like, oh, I gotta find all these orbs, and each orb more or less has like some interesting aspect to it. Or it's like, oh, you have to go to the fairy village, and the fairy village like hates non-fairies and dwarves. Like, that's like, oh, it's just like things that like make you locations and like events that happen that remind you like, oh, this is the adventure I went on. And then, getting all the orbs and waking up the dragon and then flying on the dragon for the first time. And then like, getting to the other world in Dragon Quest 3, which is like the world of Dragon Quest 1 and 2. It's just like all of those things that just like make that sense of adventure and like that journey feel so like special. Um, what about you, Kevin?
I mean, like, I don't really have a counter to that, right? Like, there's like that's like a sense of adventure. I think is definitely important. I mean, that's such a large part of so many JRPGs in terms of you have to travel the world, or you have to see these major sites, or you have to do these things. It's rarely a situation where it's like it takes place in this one place and you're not leaving, and it's just here. Like that's usually not a focus, right? Because again, a huge thing is traveling the world, seeing things. I would absolutely agree that a sense of adventure is something very important. And even those games that do mess around a little bit with the concept of like, a central location, they still have you leaving and going elsewhere for the sake of branching out and seeing the world.
Yeah, like the Crossbell games in Trails do a great job of that. Like Crossbell is like the central place for a lot of games, but it does like, and this is something that like Yakuza also does really well, where like they use these same locations, but they do a really good job at making time feel like time has passed, like time has evolved, the location has evolved. Like that is perfectly fine with me as well.
Yeah.
It's really just like how you use that space. Because sensitive adventure doesn't have to particularly mean going place to place to place. Because there are some games where like, when I say sense of adventure, like it's not just like going place to place, but making those places actually memorable. Of being like, oh, remember that arc? Like that's why I really love Johto. Like I don't love Johto because of like, I go back to Kanto. It's like, no, I love the stuff that I was doing in Johto. I loved like getting the medicine for the Ampharos. You know what I mean? Like that was like such a bizarre thing. Like the Bellsprout Tower, and like there's all these key locations I just like remember like just in Johto going through, and just like the the Japanese architecture inspiration of like a lot of the buildings, and like those are the things that make me love Johto. Because I feel like a lot of people that say like, oh, you love Johto because you go back to Kanto and you get 16 badges, and I'm like, that is cool. Like it's cool like that it serves as this kind of like pseudo sequel to the Kanto games, but that's not why I love Johto. Like I love Johto for Johto, the actual region. And so yeah, ultimately there's like so many different ways that you can define sense of adventure, and the way that those are done well. But I think that those are the things that I look for where I'm just like, this is an incredible JRPG.
I mean, there's things we can certainly touch on as far as like what are common, again, even though it's not a requirement, I feel like turn-based tends to get a bonus for being like, oh, that's a JRPG. Leveling systems and enemies having weaknesses, and how combat and strategy plays into it. But I would say like, again, the sense of adventure, the way the story is told, and the again, not a hard requirement, but usually a sense of party and like lived in world, I think play a very large part. In terms of like giving that feeling, whether you're standing in a line swinging an enemy or doing things in real time.
Yeah, and I think like for most people, when it comes to just Western RPGs, they would say outside of the party thing, they would say most of the other things, because that's like how RPGs are structured.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just like how JRPGs are approached versus how Western RPGs are approached.
Yeah.
And again, we're not Western RPG haters over here. We love our like Mass Effect. I love Mass Effect. No, Baldur's Gate 3. Like
I am pumped for Avowed, and I forget the exact date right now. But like, I am. There is stuff coming out for both like Western and Japanese RPGs that I am hyped for right now.
Yeah, but there is this like these distinct differences, and I think like just speaking for myself, I think like how JRPGs stories are told, and like how they're like the kind of like the settings and the and just like the way that things are executed, I vibe with more in most times than like a Western RPG.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say I vibe more. I vibe different though. It's different food. You know what I mean? Like I just like sometimes in the mood for this. Like I want a bunch of choices and like a whole lot of, and sometimes just definitely. Like give me the 80-hour epic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And because like I just recently got the Witcher trilogy on Steam during the Steam sale or whatever. And I just also got the Dragon Age games, because like for those that are listening that don't know me, I have severe arachnophobia. To the point where I can't play video games with spiders in them in most cases. Not all cases.
That's a problem in a lot of Western RPGs.
That's a problem in a lot of Western RPGs. And some in JRPGs as well. So, but those are two franchises that I really want to play. And I'm just like, I'm gonna get arachnophobia mods for these games, and then that's how I can play them. There's some good from PC gaming, you know what I mean? I'm a console gamer primarily, so I'm not a PC hater, but like I like my couch experience. But yeah, so is there anything else you want to talk about regarding what is a JRPG?
I think we nailed like the core of at least what I think matters to us. Yeah, like I think there's, and again, like it's such a subjective thing. I'm sure if this was a different pair of hosts or one of us was swapped out, there'd be a whole other different set of like, oh man, it is important that fire deals double damage to ice enemies or something. Like there's always going to be like differences, but I think for us, like that's
I am sure there's someone listening that's devastated about how I felt about Dragon Quest IV. Or like, you know what I mean? Just like how dare this person say this? But yeah, okay, awesome. Well, that's it, everybody.
I think that's the first episode. I think we did. I think we got through 2+ hours of talking. I don't know the exact count, but
honestly, expected it to be longer.
Really?
I actually expected. Yeah, I did because like to be transparent, we did a test episode a few weeks ago, and it was like a little bit longer than this. It was, and so was it not?
I think it was about as long, but we didn't cover as much. Maybe.
Okay.
Well, we also got really in the weeds about some stuff, but
okay.
Where are we at right now? We're at 2 hours and 10 minutes. Yeah, we're at. I figured we were going to be 2 to 2.5. So
okay, yeah, sounds good.
Yeah,
that works.
Not always going to be this long, but there was a lot to cover. Introduce ourselves, do the news. Sometimes it'll be this long. Sometimes it'll be longer. It's going to be however long it needs to be.
Exactly. Well, Kevin, please tell the lovely people where they can find you.
You can find me here on this podcast as long as we keep uploading to it, which is the plan. But outside of that, I'm very imaginative with my names, and you can find me just under my name, Kevin Kenson, pretty much everywhere. These days, I'm a little more active on Blue Sky. I'm starting to post more at Instagram because I need to do that. Oops. Content creation life. And then my main big thing is YouTube. That's where you're going to find my longer form videos that are stuff on the game industry. I do have a side channel I'll be uploading to again eventually. That was going to be my outlet for like game focused coverage, but I think that's starting to come here a little more. But I can have some opinions outside of Cam and I.
yeah, exactly. Let's get Kevin to 1 million followers on YouTube this year.
I'm gonna make it happen this year.
Yeah, we got to make it happen. And then you can find me on all the socials at Cam Final Mix. And we just appreciate you tuning in to our first episode. We totally want feedback, any sort of constructive criticism that you can help us with. Some things might be easy to fix. Some other things, like me rambling and stuttering over my words, might take a few more episodes, but it's all stuff that we are wanting to work on and better ourselves, and we're really excited about this project, and we hope everyone enjoyed this first episode, and until next time, see ya.
Later.